Good evening. We're going to be talking about bicycles in the city of Winston-Salem. This group is integrated by Jaquan, Daniel, Lauren, and myself, Robin. The agenda for tonight is going to be introduction, results and analysis, implementation plan, and questions. I'm going to start off with introduction. So the Comprehensive Bicycle Master Plan, also known as the CBMP, intention is to aid increase the bicycle riding in the city of Winston-Salem. Also, it will help Winston-Salem become a greener and more environmentally friendly city. It will promote a healthier lifestyle, and at the same time, it will provide ways to decrease traffic congestion and parking availability issues. The City of Winston-Salem conducted the 2019 resident survey. Questions were asked on how residents felt about the city in many aspects of life, such as traffic, parks, and bicycles. Over 1,000 people participated and gave information that was used to gauge the city performance and public opinion. This is how the Comprehensive Bicycle Master Plan came as a viable solution to address issues by increasing bicycle riding and at the same time promoting Winston-Salem to become a greener and more environmentally friendly city, promoting a healthier population and decreasing traffic congestion and contamination. I'm going to be followed by Daniel. He is going to be talking about results and analysis.
Thank you, Robin. Next slide, please. So our goal with this is really to help the city of Winston-Salem by using the survey data to increase the effectiveness of the bicycle master plan. And in order to start, we have to start with the survey because that was where to start. Before we could use the survey, we had to convert it to numerological data. Once we had everything like this, we plugged it into JumpPro and we're able to calculate R-squared values. Now, the R-squared values are a method of finding correlations. And data that are closer to 1 or -1 indicate correlation, whereas ones that are lower, closer to 0, indicate low correlation. So once we had high data, or high R-squared values, we plotted the data to make sure they're indeed correlations, which you'll see on the left-hand side. Versus the plot on the right, it looks like a correlation, except when you look at the graph itself, obviously it's just a false positive. Next slide, please. The US Census Bureau actually looked at Winston-Salem too, and what they found is that the average citizen is younger, about in their 20s, with an equal ratio of males to females, and when it came to income, the average citizen was lower middle class. Well, according to survey data, cyclists were different. Cyclists were roughly middle age. In fact, about 2/3 of them were over 45. Also, females outnumber males by a ratio of 3-2, and income was the biggest surprise. About 45% reported that they earn over 100,000 a year. And when it comes to 60,000 or more, that's fully 2/3 of the population of cyclists. So clearly, cycling in the city tends to be more further affluent. Next slide, please. Let's take a look at Let's take a look at why people cycle. Now, typically one would assume that it's for recreational purposes, but that's not necessarily what the survey shows here. Going back to the survey, two of the lowest scoring areas were traffic. People just are tired of all the cars everywhere. And also parking, and not just park anywhere, but in particularly business-heavy districts, such as downtown. Now, looking at our correlations, there's a high correlation between people who cycle and people who use public transportation. It was 89%, as well as people who cycle and use buses as their main source of transportation. Again, R-squared value of 81%. So one might think that, yes, maybe people cycle because they don't have an option. Maybe they choose buses because they don't have cars. Well, that's not the truth. Cyclists who use buses reported that, well, 92 of these people have vehicles, so they have options. Not only that, they're not necessarily poor. If we look at the top left, we'll see that demographics of regular bus users run all income levels, roughly about equally, more or less. Whereas with cyclists, most cyclists who use the bus make 60,000 or more a year. So money is not an issue. These people are doing it for other reasons, and they have options. They choose to cycle. Well, if we combine this with trends in the cycling community, we can actually come to a conclusion that a lot of times they're commuting to work. They want to avoid traffic. They need to get to where they're going, to downtown, to business areas. And cycling and park and ride programs are the best alternative. Next slide, please. Let's take a look at how they get there. When we analyzed the data, we found that 89% of cyclists visit city parks versus only 54% of non-cyclists. So it's important for city officials to look at where they're going and make sure they maintain these parks, and particularly trails, because trails are great for cyclists because they keep people away from cars, which can be dangerous. Furthermore, 76% of cyclists say they visit recreational centers versus only 47% of non-cyclists, which makes sense because these rec centers usually have public facilities like bathrooms, drinking water, perhaps even changing rooms, things cyclists need. So these rec centers are also important because they can serve as great focal points for disseminating information. If city officials want to reach cyclists, this is a great way to put out information, let people know what's going on, and if, in fact, even encourage cycling. Next slide, please. Before a program for cycling can be successful, we have to look at issues that cyclists are facing. And 21% of cyclists report that they've been victims of a crime. And while this may not seem like a high amount, it's actually double what non-cyclists had, which is only 10%. Now, furthermore, 55% of these crime victims report that it was serious enough to contact a police officer, versus only 31% of non-cyclists. Now, before people start worrying and thinking we need a higher police presence in the city, this isn't necessarily a case of violent crime. Violent crime was only 2% across the board. So violent crime rates are still low. So let's look at what this could be. And if we go back to the surveys, when people were given the option of commenting, giving suggestions, the #1 complaint category was traffic enforcement, specifically people running red lights, people speeding. It's the ways people drive. And with cyclists, one of their concerns was either non-existent bicycle lanes or really narrow bicycle lanes. All these things that put them in harm's way and put them in jeopardy for their lives, which might cause them not to want to ride further, and why indicate why they like parks so much, because they're safer there. So the city wants to be successful in this bicycle program. These are areas they need to address. I'm going to be followed by Lauren, who's going to talk about implementation.
Thanks, Dan. I would like to talk next briefly about the implementation of strategies that the city has adopted to address some of the issues identified in the survey results. In 2005, the city published the first master bicycle plan that pointed out the benefits of alternative transportation methods. In 2019, this plan was updated with current data and was published as the 2019 Comprehensive Bicycle Master Plan. The update outlines 6 strategic areas that the city is focusing on to improve the use of bicycles as a means of alternative transportation. Next slide, please. As Dan mentioned, the first finding in the resident survey data related to commuting time required by workers in Winston-Salem. To improve access and encourage more people to use the current infrastructure, the city has committed to increasing the overall infrastructure by 100% over the next 5 years. Next slide, please. Secondly, the city has committed funding for improvements at recreation centers, and specifically the Salem Lake Greenway. The survey data, as Dan mentioned, pointed out that recreation centers are hubs for bicycle activity, and the upgrades and improvements there would further encourage residents to use these facilities. Next slide, please. Lastly, the city is very concerned with the finding that cyclists are at an increased risk of crime or in need of police assistance. As data sources used in the development of the bike plan show that the interactions between police and cyclists are often a result of vehicle traffic. The city officials are using several strategies to make the roads safer for cyclists. This includes traffic enforcement, physical barriers, education of drivers, and others that related to existing traffic laws. If the city can reduce the fear of injury or of being a victim of a crime, more people indicate or report that they would be willing to use alternative transportation means such as bicycles. The city continues to survey its residents annually through the resident survey, and it is consistently searching for new areas of concern from the residents or new ways to implement strategies to encourage more use of the existing resources. Next slide. The city has a strategic plan that has action items that will continue to guide the budget process towards improving cycling in the city. 5 of the 6 focus areas have at least one strategic objective related to improving bike usage. Through policies and strategic planning, the city is committing itself to improving the cycling culture and making the city safer for all people that are interested in alternative transportation. Next slide, please. At this time, we would welcome any questions that anyone might have.